here. My name's Matt Cottrell. I'm the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion. I'm also the L. Herbert Ballou University Professor of Africana Studies and American Studies, and here tonight as the co-coordinator of Brown's Ever True operational team. And for those of you who know, Brown Ever True is the whole campus recovery effort launched in the wake of the December 13 shooting on our campus, and its purpose is to broadcast public health knowledge in the broadest way about the impact of trauma to our entire community and to enlist our campus to look out for each other carefully. Often described as Brown standing up for Brown, Brown Ever True is one facet of the university's response, reflecting our general compassion for each other, for the new bond that connects us across differences and divisions. This afternoon, it is my great pleasure to welcome to you an event co-sponsored with Brown RISD Hillel and a chance to hear from the extraordinary Rabbi Meir Soloveichik on the subject of resilience, or soul, as I've been told to call him. To introduce him this evening, it's my secondary great pleasure to welcome our partner today, Rabbi Josh Bolton. Rabbi Bolton is a Jewish educator, a writer, an institutional leader known for building vibrant, intellectually serious, and creatively driven Jewish communities. He currently serves as the executive director of Brown RISD Hillel, where he has led a 7-year period of transformation with extraordinary fundraising goals, expanding student engagement, strengthening institutional capacity, and advancing a bold vision of Jewish life on College Hill. He will transition in the coming year to serve as a senior fellow, and I think he's very grateful for the opportunity for even more reflection. Prior to coming to Brown, Rabbi Bolton spent 8 years at Penn Hillel, where he became known for launching Free Advice, a public experiment in spontaneous pastoral care that invited strangers into meaningful conversation. Across his career, he has cultivated a distinguished approach that blends classical Jewish learning with contemporary cultural expression. A writer and a thinker, Rabbi Bolton explores themes of voice, identity, and leadership and is at work on a forthcoming book on these topics. His work reflects a deep and abiding investment in helping individuals and communities think more expansively about Jewish life and its possibilities. Rabbi Bolton, thank you for your partnership and thank you for this.
Thank you, Matt. And in the very Jewish dialectic between what we would call shvira and tikkun, between brokenness and healing, I want to thank you on behalf of many colleagues for leading our community through this time. And it's not lost on me that this is, to some extent, a bookend of the semester, and just to regard where we began just a few months ago. And so thank you to you and to, I know, the many talented colleagues and administrators and faculty that have played a role in bringing the community towards healing. And of course, thanks to President Paxson and her vision for leading us in this time as well. So thank you, Matt. It's a real honor to introduce Rabbi Meir Soloveichik this afternoon. Rabbi Soloveichik is one of the most compelling Jewish public intellectuals of our time, if you don't mind me saying, a rare figure who moves with ease between the Beit Midrash and the broader cultural world. He serves as rabbi of Congregation Shereth Israel in New York City, the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States, and he also serves as director of the Strauss Center for Torah and Western Thought at Yeshiva University. But titles only tell part of the story. What makes Rabbi Soloveitchik's voice so distinctive is his ability to read Jewish texts alongside the great works of Western civilization, not as separate conversations, but as part of a shared human struggle to understand meaning, responsibility, and endurance. Whether writing about the Bible, the American founding, or the moral imagination of figures like Lincoln and Churchill, he brings a clarity and seriousness that feels increasingly rare. And perhaps most importantly for today, he is a thinker on the subject of resilience. Not resilience as a slogan, not resilience as a kind of thin optimism, but resilience rooted in memory, in ritual, in covenant, and the stubborn refusal of the Jewish people to relinquish hope, even when history might have suggested otherwise. Today's talk, Jewish History and Japanese Pottery, a personal reflection on the nature of resilience, already hints at something deeper. The idea that brokenness is not simply repaired but transformed. That fracture itself can become part of meaning. That is a deeply Jewish idea, and also, as we'll hear, a deeply human one. For those of us working on college campuses, spaces that are increasingly pressurized and polarized and at times brittle, this conversation could not come and could not be more timely. Rabbi Soloveichik invites us not only to endure the world as it is, but to think more seriously about what it means to live with depth, with tradition, and with moral courage within it. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Meir Soloveichik.
Well, first I want to thank Rabbi Josh for his truly beautiful and incredibly kind introduction. It's a joy to be back in Rhode Island with you, and a joy to be here in Brown for the first time with you, Rabbi, and to look forward to spending more time together, as I hopefully spend more time in Rhode Island in the months and maybe years to come. Vice President, thank you for welcoming me here, and I'm honored to be asked to speak as part of the Ever True program. This has been a difficult year for Brown students. And of course, the past several years have been a trying time for the Jewish community, for the Jewish people around the world. And so my goal, very much in line with the program, is to speak to you today about the nature of resiliency in general, human resiliency, and the Judaic approach to resiliency through the lens of my own experience, with a focus on a few unusual objects and some remarkable works of art. So if you came, usually a rabbi comes and gives a shiur, Talmudic talk. This will be a slightly unusual shiur, but hopefully it will speak directly to our subject. It was with extraordinary excitement that several years ago I read of a significant discovery, which was the recovery of the tablets of the Ten Commandments, in Hebrew, the Luchot. And I refer, of course, to the two tablets that were used by Cecil B. DeMille in the filming of his epic movie, The Ten Commandments, a movie with which I had been pretty obsessed. Now, some background here is very necessary. And I'm interested to see if any of the young people here have ever actually seen the Ten Commandments, the movie. Any of you guys ever seen it? No? One young guy is like, you've seen it, Ezra. You've seen it, okay. I was going to explain that it's on television every year around Passover and Easter, but then the next question would be, what's television? But some background is necessary here. So Cecil B. DeMille, the most famous director of his time, put on the Exodus story in the 1950s, and it was filmed, a lot of it, in the Sinai Desert. And for the tablets of the Ten Commandments in the film, he actually had stone tablets carved out of the site that was believed by many to be Mount Sinai. When he came back to America, he gifted those tablets to Mount Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles. They were actually put up on the outside wall originally, so that the tablets of Moses would be quite literally on Mount Sinai. And then Mount Sinai merged, it became Cedar Sinai, and they had an earthquake, and there's a whole thing. And so eventually they were put, and the culture changed so that people were less psyched about large tablets of the Ten Commandments being posted outside on a hospital. And so the tablets were stored away until many decades later, when the art curator of Cedar Sinai Hospital was doing an inventory of its vast modern art collection. Why a hospital has a modern art collection is not something I was able to figure out. But he was doing an inventory, and he came upon this work that was anything but modern. And there was an article that was published about it soon after, and I read it because I'm very interested in the Ten Commandments, the movie. The actual Ten Commandments are also good, but I was really interested in the movie. And so chaplain of the Cedar Sinai Hospital calls me up and says, we're having an event. We'd like you to come speak. And I thought to myself, I don't know. I mean, it's Los Angeles. It's a schlep. And then I said, wait a minute. Aren't you the guys that have the tablets of the Ten Commandments? And the chaplain, who has since become a good friend of mine, says, yeah. And if you come, you can hold them. I mean, how do you pass that up? And so I went, and this is from the news story that was done by the hospital, me and the chaplain together holding the tablets, one of the great moments of my life. And the experience actually led me to ponder the following question. If any one of us could actually hold the real tablets of the Ten Commandments, the original tablets of Moses, what would be the source of their allure? And I realized that it would not be their miraculous nature that would be most important, but rather, rightly understood, the exact opposite. What do I mean by that? If you actually read the story of Exodus, you know that there were actually two separate sets of tablets involved in this story. There was a first set of tablets that were given to Moses after the Sinai revelation, and those were created entirely by God. But they didn't last very long because the Israelites sinned, spoiler alert, worshiped the golden calf, and these tablets were smashed by Moses almost immediately after receiving them. And then, only later, as a sign of divine forgiveness, the Almighty asked Moses to create another one, but this time through his own effort. In Hebrew, you carve now, out of your own effort, a set of tablets. God says, I will write the Ten Commandments upon them, but the tablets have to be made by you. Through Moses, 80 years old, through the agonizing effort of an octogenarian. That's how the second set of tablets would come to be. The most miraculous object in all of history was smashed immediately. But those tablets, created by human effort, reforged, those lasted. And the point, as Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote, is that this story embodies a powerful, these are his words, a powerful instance of the Jewish religious approach. God's miraculous intervention changes the universe, but only our own effort changes us. Rabbi Sacks further noted that according to the biblical story, only when Moses came down from Sinai with the second set of tablets was his face radiant, his face shone, because now he had actually done something. Now, therefore, the larger point then is, these human set of tablets are part of what make them remarkable. In fact, this is hinted to in another work of art, in another work of art regarding the tablets, which can be found in the Palace of Westminster. Okay, everybody know what the Palace of Westminster is? That's where the Parliament, the UK Parliament is. This is in honor of King Charles III's visit to America. Because my synagogue was the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States, and we all supported the American Revolution. So as a makeup in honor of King Charles's visit, I'm going to cite this. So if you go to the House of Lords, which is part of the British Parliament, it's the most beautiful room I've ever seen in my life, where the House of Lords meets. But there's a room next door which is equally resplendent, and it's called the Moses Room. It's called the Moses Room because it features a vast work of art by the Victorian artist John Rogers Herbert, depicting that scene of Moses bringing down the second set of tablets. It's a remarkable room in its own right, and actually, one story that took place there was when the late British chief rabbi, Emanuel Jacobowitz, became the first rabbi to ever become a member of the House of Lords. And that room is also used for robing, where you get the furs put on you before you go out. So as they're putting the robes on him, they say to him, Chief Rabbi, you know, you were the first rabbi in the 1,000-year history of this house to be honored in this room. And Rabbi Jacobowitz points to the painting of Moses and says, actually, I think I'm the second rabbi to be honored in this room. But if you look very carefully, and it's hard to see in the printout, but if you look very carefully, you can tell that the tablets that he is holding here in the painting are actually not smooth at all, but rough hewn. Here's a picture of it on my iPad. Very roughly hewn, with jagged edges. And I've gone there and looked at it directly. And the point, of course, is that the artist had truly understood that these are the tablets painstakingly chiseled by Moses himself. They look exactly as they were, man-made. Thus did the artist exquisitely express the most astonishing aspect of this entire tale. For us, the recarved tablets that followed the shattered ones are extraordinary, first and foremost, not because of what God did, but because of what human beings can do. And they teach us, therefore, something not only about God, but about ourselves. Or rightly understood, we are these tablets, not perfect, a work in progress, but also, like the tablets, an embodiment of the human ability to overcome a shattering that has occurred. And when we understand that, we realize that the story of the second tablets actually teach us two lessons about human experience. The first is that we are not called to perfection. And in fact, the very notion that we can achieve perfection is preposterous. This was brought home to me by a fascinating article in the New York Times by Sam Anderson about perhaps the most famous work of art in all of the history of the West, which is Michelangelo's David. The article in the Times was called David's Ankles, How Imperfections Could Bring Down the World's Most Perfect Statue. And the article describes how actually there is a flaw in the statue. Or as he writes, the trouble is the David's ankles. They are cracked. Italians first discovered this weakness back in the 19th century, and modern scientists have mapped the cracks extensively, but until recently, no one claimed to know just how enfeebled the ankles might be. But, he reveals, and I'm quoting again, what the researchers found was grim. If the David were to be tilted 15 degrees, his ankles would fail. Now, Florence, which is where the statue is, has had earthquakes before. And so he imagines in the article what would happen if the leaning, because the David statue has already been leaning, and as it's leaned year after year, century after century, the cracks have gotten worse. But if an earthquake comes, then the ankles will fail. The statue will fall. And one of the most famous works of genius in the history of the world would shatter entirely. Or, to put it slightly differently, there are profound imperfections in this artistic creation, which is often seen as the very embodiment of purported perfection. Or, if you accept a slight pun, rabbis like puns, early in my career in the rabbinate, that was when cloning first occurred, and I gave a talk on bioethics and cloning, which I called The Man with Levi's Jeans. So rabbis like puns. But if I could put it slightly differently, if in Greek poetry and myth, the godlike Achilles has a mortal heel, this seemingly divine David has Achilles' ankles. And an awareness of this, as Sam Anderson further reflects, teaches us, again, not only how we see the David, but how we see ourselves. He writes, when I first saw the David in person, the only word that came to mind was perfect. Why hadn't anyone ever told me he was perfect? And then he added that David suggested that my true self existed most fully in some interstellar superhistorical realm in which all the ideal things of the universe commingled in a perpetual ecstasy of harmonizing trumpet blasts. If such perfection could exist in the world, I felt, then so many other things were suddenly possible. To live a perfect life, creating perfect things, to find an ideal way to be. What was the point of anything less? That's what he thought when he saw the David when he was your age, students. But now, he writes, he understands that, quote, perfection, it turns out, is no way to try to live. It is a child's idea, a cartoon. This desire not to be merely good, not to do merely well, but to be faultless, to transcend everything, including the limits of yourself. It is less heroic than neurotic, and it doesn't take much analysis to get to its ugly side, a lust for control, pseudo-fascist purity, self-destruction. Perfection makes you flinch at yourself, flinch at the world, flinch at any contact between the two. This is exactly right. And Judaism, of course, does not believe that God made a perfect world. At the very heart of Jewish theology is the notion that God deliberately made it imperfect, and thereby some of the most extraordinary of human virtues can instantiate themselves, and only then can they come into being. Or as the foremost theologian of the 20th century, Yogi Berra, once put it, if the world was perfect, it wouldn't be. If the world was perfect, it wouldn't be. He was a brilliant man, though my favorite statement of his is when he stayed at a hotel and he said, the towels there were so thick I could barely close my suitcase. But what does that mean if the world was perfect? It wouldn't be. What that means is, if this was a perfect world, yes, it would be devoid of suffering. It would be devoid of evil. But think of the virtues that could then not instantiate themselves. Repentance, heroism, bravery, charity. All these only are, and of course, endurance and resilience. All these can only make themselves manifest because we are not perfect and because the world is not perfect. Because rather we are like the tablets that were made by man. And this in turn brings us to the next point. The Talmud, interestingly enough, insists that after the second set of tablets were recarved by Moses, the Ark of the Covenant actually contained not only the newly reforged ones, but the shattered tablets that had come before. Or in the rabbinic phrase, luchot v'shifrei luchot munachot ba'aron. Both the tablets and the shattered tablets were both contained in the Ark. The point seems to be that only when we have the shattered pieces and the tablets reforged taken together in tandem do we truly see their sublime symbolism, their true meaning, something that is central to Jewish history, which is the ability to come back after disaster, to not lose hope after experiencing a shattering, to recreate after experiencing destruction. If there is an art form that captures this concept, it is a form of Japanese pottery known as kintsugi. Now, I have a deep interest in Japan, in part because of the very imperfections of the world and the evil within it. Some of you may have heard of the Japanese consul to Kovno, Lithuania during World War II, Chiune Sugihara, the Japanese Schindler, who saved thousands of Jews by giving them visas. These Jews then went to Japan, to Kobe, Japan, and there were helped by another courageous Japanese individual. Two of those Jews were my maternal grandparents. So I've always felt a bond to Japan. Also, I really, really like sushi, a lot. As a rabbi, I go to a lot of weddings, and if you've experienced traditional Jewish weddings, you know that they all have buffets. And because Jews love sushi now, there's always sushi there. So I only go to the sushi table, and the caterers don't know that I'm a rabbi, so the people who work there, they don't understand why they're always seeing me, because I go to a lot of events. And they certainly don't understand why I'm only going to the sushi table. So I'll never forget, I was at this beautiful event at the Waldorf, and of course I went straight to the sushi table, and the sushi chef looks up at me, Japanese individual, and says, "You follow me everywhere." So I've been very interested in Japan. I've been to Japan several times. I've helped publish a book about this story of the Jews in Japan. And it was because of this interest that I came upon this form of Japanese art. Let me give you a description by the writer Daniel Pink about how it came into being. In the 15th century, or so the story goes, a Japanese shogun named Ashikaga Yoshimasa dropped a Chinese tea bowl, which broke into several pieces when it hit the floor. He sent the damaged bowl back to China to be repaired. But what he received in return months later was an ungainly mess of an object. The bowl's pieces held together by bulky metal staples. There's got to be a better way, he thought, and he asked local craftspeople to find it. They chose to repair the pottery by sanding down the edges of the broken pieces and gluing them back together using lacquer mixed with gold. The artist, here you see an example of this, the artisan's goal wasn't to faithfully reproduce the original work or even to conceal its newly acquired flaws. It was to transform the piece into something better. Their work established a new and now centuries-old art form called kintsugi. By the 17th century, according to one report, kintsugi was such a fashionable phenomenon that some people were known to smash their tea bowls on purpose in order to embed them with golden-veined repairs. So Daniel Pink writes, and he brings us up in a book which is about, as he calls it, the power of regret. It was written in response to the celebrities who always said that they lived their lives with no regrets. And his point is that no regrets is no way to live, that life is filled with mistakes and with errors and imperfections. And the goal in life is not to elide or ignore those imperfections and those mistakes, but to assimilate them into your very being, into your life story. The writer Tiffany Ayuda tells us that in kintsugi, quote, every break is unique, and instead of repairing an item like new, the 400-year-old technique actually highlights the scars as part of the design. Using this as a metaphor for healing ourselves, she writes, teaches us an important lesson. Sometimes in the process of repairing things that have broken, we actually create something more unique, beautiful, and resilient. Or as Pink further adds, the bowls aren't beautiful despite the imperfections. They're beautiful because of the imperfections. So whether, ladies and gentlemen, you are a Japanophile like myself, or maybe this is more about Japanese pottery that you ever wanted to hear, though you were sufficiently warned, I think, by the title. It struck me that kintsugi truly captures the story of these tablets and of what it means to highlight the tablets that were reforged by keeping them forever with the shattered pieces of the ones that had come before. And thus kintsugi, like the two sets of tablets in the Ark, embody, to my mind, Jewish history itself. For what better embodies the story of the Jewish people than a piece of pottery that still bears its scars, but whose reconstruction after destruction is the very source of its glory. A couple summers ago, my wife and I flew down to Florida to attend the wedding of a young man who is now a member of the board of my congregation. I'm the rabbi of the what's known as the Spanish-Portuguese Synagogue in New York, founded by Spanish-Portuguese Jews fleeing the Inquisition from Brazil. And its traditions are Sephardic, Spanish, Jewish traditions, which has taken me into a whole another world of Jewish ritual and tradition. And so this was a young man from a Moroccan Jewish family whose family had fled Spain after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. So some 5 centuries later, this young man is getting married. And I was asked to read the betrothal document, what's called the ketubah, at his wedding. And I was delighted. But then I was told something that I did not know, that this community used a ketubah, a marriage document, that had some slight variations from the text that I was used to. It was the version used by Jews of Morocco and Gibraltar who had utilized that text for 500 years since the expulsion from Castile. And then I was told that in that tradition, the ketubah is not read under the chuppah, under the wedding canopy, it is sung. And that's a huge part of the ceremony. No pressure, right? So they had a rabbi from Spain tape the singing of the ketubah, and that summer all I'm doing is listening to it. So I'm on the subway in Manhattan, I'm listening to the Castilian ketubah. I'm watching Cubs games with my sons, I'm listening to the ketubah. I'm shopping, I'm singing the ketubah. I studied the text, I learned the tune, and then I had to go down to Florida and sing it in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. And ladies and gentlemen, I nailed it. Now, here's what's striking to me. The ketubah concludes with the following words. Would you guys like to hear a little? Maybe, yeah, so here it goes like this. I'll do the Hebrew Aramaic. The last part is Hebrew. V'yakol k'fi ha'minhag v'atnai shenhagu v'shiyitkinu kilot HaKodesh hamigurashot mikastiyah Hashem yishmor nishmatam v'yachon v'yarachem al sherit pleitatam. All has been performed according to the traditions and laws of the holy community that has been exiled from Castile. May God keep their souls safe and bestow grace and mercy on the remnant of their exiles. And I stood there singing this. I thought to myself, here we are today celebrating a Jewish marriage, marking a joyous moment, using the same tunes and words of these exiles from 1492. Over 500 years ago, the king and queen of the United Kingdom of Aragon and Castile expelled this man's ancestors. And now, the Jews that were expelled reflected the Jewish ability to carve new tablets after the first had been shattered, to build new homes after the old ones they had were demolished. So, therefore, every one of these documents that is sung makes mention not only of the celebration, but of their exile. And in so doing, the celebration is actually rendered more profound, so that a technical marriage contract, because a ketubah is pretty technical, ladies and gentlemen. It's a contract. But here suddenly the contract is rendered, it's transformed from poetry, from prose to poetry. It's not only read, it's exultantly sung, so that the shatterings in Jewish life lend a depth to the celebration that is taking place. I have this very much on my mind because I'm about to sing this very same ketubah at the wedding of this young man's first cousin. Only this time, I'm doing it in Spain, in Marbella, on Memorial Day weekend. I have a very tough rabbinic life, you know. These are the sacrifices I'm going to be making for my pastoral dedication, spending a weekend in Marbella to do a destination wedding. This is what I do to celebrate the endurance of the Jewish people. But this is what it means to really appreciate Jewish history. Or to put it slightly differently, the story of Judaism is, I think, covenantal kintsugi. It bears forever and remembers the scars of what has come in the past. I remember speaking to a friend of mine, the historian Andrew Roberts, who wrote the biography of Churchill. And I said to him, it was Erev Tisha B'Av, right before the saddest Jewish day of the calendar. And I said to him, Andrew, Jews around the world are going to be sitting down and remembering a destruction that took place in the 500s BCE. And his instant reaction was, wow, this is a man who deals with the past. We don't efface the scars. We don't forget them. But that also lends profound depth to the joys of our lives. And this, I think, allows us to reconsider anew one of the most famous traditions of a Jewish wedding that all of you know, which is the breaking of a glass. The breaking of a glass. Why is that done? Usually, the breaking is affiliated with a specific tragedy, the destruction of Jerusalem. And indeed, it is linked to that in our memory. But there is more that one can say. And here, I have to hit you guys with some historical knowledge. You've all seen this glass thing, whether you're Jewish or not, whether you've seen it. You've seen it at a Jewish wedding, or you've seen it on a TV show that's that shows a Jewish wedding. But you've always seen them step on a glass. That's not what was done originally. Not at all. Let me show you an amazing thing. If you turn the page to your handout, we have this incredible letter. This was a letter written by Benjamin Rush. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, the second most famous Philadelphian after Franklin, good friend of Jefferson and Adams. He was also friends with a prominent Jew in Philadelphia, who was originally a member of my congregation. Jonas Phillips is his name. Jonas Phillips and his wife, these were two Jews from originally my community. I'm not making this up. They had 21 children. He's literally American Judaism's founding father. And so he invites Benjamin Rush to one of his daughter's weddings. And Benjamin Rush is psyched because he loves religion and is super interested. And so he writes a letter to his wife. This is a non-Jewish Philadelphian attending a Jewish wedding. You can't imagine that taking place in Europe in the 18th century. 1787, that's when this is happening. And he describes to his wife every step of the Jewish ceremony. The funniest part is he describes the prayer service that takes place beforehand, the afternoon service, mincha. And he writes, and maybe you really have to know Jews to do this, but maybe the funniest sentence ever written in the English language, he writes to his wife, "As I did not understand a word except now and then an amen and a hallelujah, my attention was drawn to the haste with which they covered their heads and to the freedom with which they conversed with each other during this period of their worship." Maybe the most hysterical thing ever written, okay? But he says, he describes the whole ceremony, including the breaking of the glass. And then he writes as follows. Let's just start from the bottom paragraph, end of the fourth line. After the giving of the ring, this ceremony was followed by handing the wine to the father of the bride and then a second time to the bride and groom. The groom, after sipping the wine, took the glass in his hand and threw it upon a large pewter dish which was suddenly placed at his feet. Upon its breaking into a number of small pieces, there was a general shout of joy and a declaration that the ceremony was over. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, that the original tradition was not to step on the glass. And it was not a special glass that they reserved. They would take the glass that was used for the ceremony, the symbol of this new covenant being formed between husband and wife, and they would throw it. In Europe to this day, if you go to old synagogues, you'll find, because the weddings were in the courtyards, chuppah stones built into the synagogue wall that they would throw the glass against. That was the original tradition. Why did that stop? People were worried, I think, now about litigation, right? Someone could get hurt, right? If then you get sued. You don't want that. So people got nervous about it. But originally it was thrown. It was thrown. And this links to a suggestion made by my great uncle, the great Talmudist and philosopher, Rabbi Josh Bolton, who, drawing on a medieval source that he cited, suggested that the breaking of the glass is a reminder not only of the destruction of Jerusalem, but also of the very first tragedy and shattering experience that occurred in Jewish history, the shattering of the tablets. And the point, I think, is profound, because by flinging a glass, participants in a wedding are reminded not only of the breaking of the tablets, but also of what followed. Not only of the tablets created by God that were lost, but of the second tablets that were recreated. The tablets painstakingly chiseled by Moses through painstaking effort, reminding us all not only of the destructions that have occurred in the past, but also why weddings must continue to be celebrated. Why homes must continue to be recreated. Every new celebration is an embodiment of resilience, so that every family forged is its own act of covenantal kintsugi, and remembering the shatterings renders our appreciation, our celebration of the moment more profound. The truth is that this, for the Jewish people, have been, at times, a shattering period over the last 3 years. But it's also been one in which resiliency has been made manifest. And so I cite this as well as we gather in a year that has been a very difficult one for Brown and for Brown students. one in which a shattering was experienced, a horrific act of violence was experienced, but also a year in which responsibility for one another and resilience and compassion for one another was made manifest. And rightly understood then, the goal is not to suggest that the scars can ever be effaced or erased, but rather that this year can be remembered as one in which the reforging in the face of shattering can be seen for the grandeur that it truly embodies. Some years ago, I was traveling to Israel, and I stopped in Berlin for several hours because I wanted to visit one of my favorite paintings, which I had never seen with my own eyes, which is Rembrandt's depiction of Moses holding the tablets aloft. Hard to see it in the picture here, but I'll show it to you on my iPad here. You can see it here. This is it. Now, so I got off the plane, went straight to the Gemälde Gallery in Berlin, and stood there looking at the title. Rembrandt didn't name his paintings. So I'm looking at the title given by the museum in the German, Moses zerschmettert die Tabletten die Gesetze. Moses shatters the tablets of the law. Standing there in Berlin, thinking about shattering, of course, leads one to ponder the shatterings that have occurred in Jewish history, especially in the 20th century. But actually, the title given by the museum is controversial, because if you look very carefully at the painting, Moses does not actually look that upset as he holds the tablets aloft. It doesn't look like he's about to throw the tablets because of an act of idolatry by the Israelites. And so therefore there are some that suggest that what Rembrandt is depicting here is not the destruction of the first tablets, but the bestowal of the second. That's why light pours out of his face, as the art historian Simon Schama notes. And I've come to the conclusion that perhaps Rembrandt is being deliberately ambiguous because, of course, the grandeur of the second set of tablets is only truly understood if we recall the earlier episode of the shattering. The broken tablets and the whole tablets were both contained in the ark, the Talmud tells us. And Rembrandt is trying to meld both those episodes in his very canvas. So I stood there pondering the canvas, and then I got in cab and went to the airport for my flight to Tel Aviv. Probably because I had a one-way ticket. That's suspicious. I was taken aside by El Al, the Israeli airline security agent, for further questioning. I'm a very suspicious person. So she said to me, do you want to do this in Hebrew or in English? So I said in Hebrew, Mashat Matifa, whichever you prefer. I was showing off. She did not seem impressed. And so she says to me in Hebrew, she says, do you live in Berlin? I said, no, I'm from New York. So she says, what do you do in New York? So I said, I'm the rabbi of the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue in New York. So she says to me, do you speak Spanish or Portuguese? I said, no, not one word. So now she's thinking this is like the worst cover story, right, that anyone has ever come up with. So she says to me, she says, how long have you been? And I said, a couple hours, now I'm leaving. And then she said, why did you come here? And I said, I came to see a Rembrandt. So she says to me in Hebrew, you came just to see a Rembrandt? So I hold up a picture of it on my phone and I say in Hebrew, so lo rak Rembrandt and Moshe Rabbeinu. It's not just Rembrandt, it's Moses. And I start explaining first tablet, second tablets, and she says, just get back in line. Because I may be a security threat, but she is not going to hear a lecture from a rabbi. All right, that's, too much to ask for. So I went through security and prepared to board the plane. And I thought to myself, maybe she didn't want to hear it, but it is an incredible fact of Jewish history that now I am here, a rabbi, standing in Germany, boarding a plane, speaking in Hebrew, boarding a plane to Tel Aviv. Certainly not something I would have predicted some decades before in Berlin. And it itself, like so many other stories and so many other images, is a symbol of the covenantal kintsugi that is part of Jewish history and the very capacity for kintsugi that lies at the very heart of the human soul, that lies at the heart of all of us. That is ultimately the lesson of the tablets. And so it means the world to me that as you prepare for your finals, you're willing to come here, a rabbi, give a talk, and to speak to you about Japanese pottery. And because I am a rabbi, I will conclude with a prayer that the kintsugi that you have experienced in this year at Brown be remembered from the rest of your life, an inspiration for what it means to rise to the occasion in the face of a shattering experience, and of what it means to take scars and to help them become golden by God's grace. Thank you for having me.
For you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
We have the opportunity now to engage in a conversation, and I hope that you all, this is a very intimate setting. I hope that you all feel inspired to speak and share, and I'm sure on the subject of resilience and on many different ancillary subjects as well. Please, I hope you have questions, and we can distribute a microphone as well in a moment. I'll open us up here, and thank you again. I know that questions reveal much more about the questioner in many ways, and so I say all my questions humbly.
Yeah. In a Jewish audience, you're just excited to get an actual question rather than a three-part statement.
Right,
So,
exactly. Okay, so it's hard for me not to, sitting in a university, where knowledge is the subject at hand.
Yeah.
It's hard for me not to think, to hold on to your very evocative image of the shattered pieces, holding the many pieces, and reflect on knowledge and maybe slightly differently wisdom. And I think that both Einstein and Rabbi Nachman have some comment about the essence of knowledge is that we don't truly know, or we reach the boundaries of what we know. This is wisdom, and I would just love to hear you reflect a little bit on how the question of knowledge and wisdom plays out.
So it's very interesting you asked that. It's very. I don't know what the motto of Brown is. What is the original motto of Brown? Does anyone? What does that mean? What does that mean? In God we trust. Is that what it is? In God we hope. Oh, very interesting. So it's very interesting that if you look at a lot of the original mottos, they bring together the symbolism of light and the symbolism of faith. Light as a symbol of enlightenment, and faith almost as the opposite in the sense of the limitations of human knowledge. Yale is well known, right? Urim v'tumim, lux et veritas, light and truth. Columbia is in lumine tuo we debimus lumen, by your light, God, we see light. That's actually a verse in the Hebrew Bible, Ba'or chanira or. And at the heart of the Jewish intellectual experience is both a celebration of the human intellect for what it can achieve, but also a realization of its limits. And the two have to go hand in hand. Or, to utilize my great uncle's felicitous phrase, the quest for knowledge for human beings embodies majesty and humility. Majesty and humility. You have to you have to include both. My granduncle told a story that when he was a young boy, if you've ever studied Talmud, you know that on the one hand, it's one of the most complex and abstract subjects you will ever study, one of the most intellectually challenging things that the human mind will ever engage. And it is, I think, a testament to the intellectual lifeblood of Judaism over hundreds of years. And then sometimes the rabbis say, when they ask a question, we don't know. And they end with the phrase teku. Teku means let the matter stand unresolved. Nowadays in modern Hebrew, teku means a tie, like in a soccer match. If they say, what was the score? They say teku. Okay, but originally it means the rabbis, who certainly did not lack confidence, would say, we don't know. And my great uncle as a child asked his father, my great grandfather, why did the rabbis leave these unresolved? And they're all over the place. And he said, because the rabbis wanted to teach us a lesson. This is the original Yiddish. He said, a Jew has to know that there are things that one doesn't know. So it's almost the opposite of, if you read the Apology of Socrates, it's almost the opposite. Socrates, which is important in its own right, but Socrates' quest for knowledge begins with the fact that he knows that there are things he doesn't know, but that leads him to search for knowledge. The Oracle at Delphi says he is the wisest because he knows that there are things that he doesn't know. That's what Socrates describes in the Apology. Here, it's almost the opposite, that at the apex of knowledge, the rabbis just say, we let this matter stand unresolved. Socrates doesn't do that. If you read the Phaedo right before he dies, he all of a sudden has like unbelievable certainty about what's going to happen in the next world, where he's going after he dies, and so forth. The rabbis are almost the opposite. They have incredible confidence in asking questions and in giving answers, and then they just leave things unresolved. Just like the traditional Jewish observance is filled with rituals that we can readily understand and explain, and also things that we cannot readily understand and explain. There's an Orthodox Jewish Nobel Prize laureate in economics. His name is Robert Aumann, Yisrael Aumann. And he was asked about this. Like, they asked him in an interesting article, they said, you literally run a center at Hebrew University, which is called this, he did game theory. He said, you literally run a center which is called the Center for Human Rationality. And then you do all these weird rituals and observances. Like, they were talking about one specific one. She was being very respectful. It was a traditional publication. And he said the two are not anti each other. They're orthogonal to each other. And then, of course, the question is, well, what does orthogonal mean, right? Okay, but that's not our topic for today. And so he said they're part of the music of life. In other words, the two go together like notes in a composition. And so Judaism always emphasizes both. It emphasizes both. It emphasizes both the celebration of knowledge, but also the limitations of what human beings could actually achieve. And I think that tension, that dialectic, is particularly Judaic, and it's not a coincidence that you see it specifically in a lot of the early schools in America, which were also the first to incorporate Hebrew in their seals, emphasizing both light, which is the power of enlightenment, but also the fact that there are aspects of truth that even the human intellect cannot be fully enlightened about on their own.
And I'm going to follow this just a little bit. So the American University is also the experimental laboratory of the liberal tradition.
Yeah.
And of course, we are living through a period that, from a number of perspectives, you might say is anti-liberal. Listening to you reflect on the limits of knowledge, I'm, sensitive to the role that strain plays in the liberal tradition. We live in a moment, and certainly here on campus you can feel it, in which, to use a word that's important, that used to be important in the Hillel world, the pluralistic tradition. It's very out of fashion. Pluralism is not in right now. Folks, including myself, would much rather live in the silos of our communities, and that's a reasonable thing. It's a difficult world to get by in. You might as well surround yourself with people who see the world the same. I want to ask you, though, that seems like a loss.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask, as a rabbi, is there any reward in the world to come for pluralism, for taking a pluralistic perspective?
I would be inconsistent with what I said before if I told you I had any certainty about how rewards are given in the world to come. So I see you were trying to catch me there in an inconsistency, but I saw into your trap.
That's fine.
But I would say this. I would say that obviously it seems that what's meant to be most enriching about the university experience, at least in whether you're in a public university or a Stoward University of Learning like Brown, obviously it's going to be slightly different if you're at Yeshiva University, though I think I try to practice this there in my classes certainly as well. It's just socially different, obviously. But I think we do practice it in my classes, is that at the heart of an education is to be challenged by ideas with which you might disagree. Socrates, for that, used to be the model. And the hope was that you could challenge people and so that genuine pluralism in America, at least this is just my view, is not the same as relativism, right? It doesn't mean that everything is equally true, but that in our search for truth, we are best enriched by engaging others that are very different than us. The truth is, in my own experience in the academy, I've been blessed to have that. I do get the sense that it is, you do find it less and less. I did my doctorate at Princeton in the religion department. And my mentor there, I had 3 different teachers that impacted me profoundly. And one could not be more different than the other. Leora Betnitsky, who was one of the great scholars of modern Jewish thought. Robert P. George, probably the most prominent Catholic intellectual in America. And Jeff Stout, who important scholar and thinker, who certainly on the other end of the religious spectrum in many ways than me, and very different than me in so many ways, and was interested in all sorts of things in which I was not interested. Like he was also the assistant soccer coach at Princeton, and and taught cultural film, like European films, which I knew nothing about. Like I remember I walked into the lounge and he said to me, "Sally, I'm teaching a course on faith and film, or film and faith. Do you have any suggestions for an important Jewish film?" And I was like, "I don't know, The Big Lebowski, maybe. I don't know." But I always felt comfortable with every single one of them, expressing my views and to be challenged by them in turn. That's what made for such an enriching experience. All it requires is openness to the other. I keep quoting my great uncle, but my great uncle, in one of his great readings, actually on interfaith engagement, when he described how the first 2 human beings that are ever created, Adam and Eve is described as an ezer kenegdo, which literally translated means a helpmate against him. And what that means is he's describing not marriage, but human difference in general. That human beings can both exist in covenantal communion and are meant to, but that covenant itself does not elide the differences between human beings. Every human being is different. And with that difference comes a difference, as Madison famously says in Federalist 10. With those differences comes differences of views, differences about religion, about economics, about politics. The goal is to allow for that human difference and to be enriched by it. And I think that would be the university at its best. Whether it's practiced in a university with a very diverse student body, or in a class with just Orthodox Jews like the one I just taught on Zoom just now before I came in here, but in which you're trying to challenge the students by reading people that think very differently than you. That's the larger goal, and it's something that I still try to achieve. Whether that's part of everyday education, I think depends on the school and on every person's experience, I think. But I think that is the responsibility of what a teacher is meant to foster. But in my own view, but of course, someone may disagree. Yeah.
I have more questions, but are there any questions from the
Let's take from
the
Ezra,
audience?
who, by the way, I want to say, lives on the Upper West Side. Oh, Ezra's your name, sir? No, I'm sorry. I don't know why I called you Ezra. Okay. From now on, you will be called Ezra. Make a note of that for Brown.
Noted.
Noam, who's from the Upper West Side, but has never come to visit my synagogue, but went to school right next door to it.
It's awkward.
I didn't mean to engage in public shaming. Yeah, that's not what this was. This is I'm engaging in the sacred Jewish ritual of the airing of grievances. Yeah, please. Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, a very striking part of this notch here, as you put it, was the introduction of sources and traditions that come with the notch.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tension in the yeshiva world and in other places with how much sanctity do you give to non-Torah sources. And I know Yeshiva University has a specific take on that, but I'm
Yeah.
not sure you think specifically. And obviously, there's some things you shouldn't give sanctity to. So
Yeah.
You might restate the question so it's on.
Sure. So the question is, what does it mean to come from within traditional Judaism and to seek wisdom from the larger world? And all I can say is, and it's of course a central question to being a traditional Jew. For me, I'm going to speak personally, which is just that I've had revered role models who did that in their lives. So I grew up both with the legacy of my great uncle, who I didn't know, but of course you're talking about somebody who grew up steeped in Talmud in Eastern Europe and then went to University of Berlin to study philosophy. I grew up very close to, in the towering figure of my life, which is my grandfather, Rabbi Meir Soloveichik, who did the same thing in his youth and then arrived in America at 13 and went to law school and would not, unlike my great uncle, he wouldn't cite Kierkegaard or Otto or Kant, but would, in his Torah lectures, would talk about Adams and Jefferson and the Declaration. So for me, this was an approach that I always, it sounds, I don't know if it sounds strange or not, but it was just assumed and natural for me growing up that that's what it meant to live as a dedicated and traditional, intellectually curious Jew. But at the same time, and we were talking about this, you have to be open as well to new experiences. I had no interest in art 15 years ago. So as late as after my doctorate, I finished my doctorate in 2010. If you would have told me in 2010 that I'd be giving a talk at Brown University that would include John Rogers Herbert painting, I would say to you, who's John Rogers Herbert? And why would I talk about something as boring as art? That would have been my response, and I'm not exaggerating. I certainly wouldn't have known what kintsugi is. And so, as the Talmud says, if you are told that there is wisdom amongst the nations of the world, you should believe it. And that means that, or as Maimonides famously said, accept the truth from those who say it. And you should be open to finding deep insights in places which you could never have imagined before. And now, I read the stories of the Torah entirely differently and more profoundly thanks to Rembrandt's paintings. And that's just one example. Obviously, there have been others within the history of Judaism that have had a different approach to the world. I could only live in the way of the people that have inspired me. My grandfather, Rabbi Norman Lamb, the late president of Yeshiva, with whom I was very close. And I grew up in an environment in which this was, I think I could say, not only natural, but expected. So please, follow up, of course. I think absolutely Judaism has a singular view about certain things. And of course, looking through, and if you are a traditional person of faith, you believe that your faith tradition embodies the fullest expression of truth. But that also means that at times engaging the wisdom of the larger world will involve noting the tensions between them. So this is a great work of art, the David. From a Jewish perspective, is it an authentic, meaning is it art as art is ideally to be done? The irony of the David is that when David is chosen in the book of Samuel, the prophet Samuel is looking for someone who's tall, because Saul is tall. And God says, and this is my favorite Bible verse. You know when you run for president, people ask you, like, what's your favorite Bible verse? I'm ready. So God says, do not look to his height or his appearance, for I have rejected this. Ha'adam yireh lo einayim v'Hashem yireh lo levav. Man looks to the superficial, but God looks to the heart. And so the irony is that the most famous image of David in all of art is a 17-foot tall Greek statue. Whereas Rembrandt's depiction of David, which is 6 inches of an etching of David praying to God after his most severe sin, is a much more authentic, I think, depiction of David. So exploring the world of art, for example, means you have to be aware of the tensions between, let's say, Athens and Jerusalem. And I teach a course called Athens and Jerusalem, which is about that. If you read Maimonides, you know that he was profoundly impacted by Aristotle. But Maimonides puts certain virtues at the heart of his ethics that you will not find in Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics. Leon Cass, who taught at University of Chicago classical texts for many years before teaching the Bible, was asked about the differences. And he said there are profound differences. And he says one is humility. Aristotle does not have humility as a virtue. The great-souled man for the Nicomachean ethics is, as the phrase is, he wonders at nothing, for all is small to him. It's the great-souled man of Aristotle. Whereas for Maimonides, humility, and the rest of his ethics is modeled almost directly on Aristotle. But for him, humility is the central virtue. So seeking wisdom from the world is important, but you also have to be guided by your own tradition to know where the tensions lie and the differences lie. And that's really what I devote a lot of my own teaching to. So I really appreciate the question. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to have you call because I don't want to.
Okay, very good. That's it, Jeremy and then Dr. Mandelbaum.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of, thank you for a great talk, first of all.
Thank you so much for coming.
I'm thinking about this model of these bowls as representative of communities that have been shadowed, so to speak, from violence and Kids of Brown, many of the other examples you give, and also of the tablets. And I think that there's one place where I'm struggling with the metaphor, and I want to hear your thoughts on that. And that's that in the case of the bowls, even if the restructured thing is not the same as the previous bowl, it still has all the parts somehow.
Yeah.
And with the tablets, as far as I understand, it has the same content as the
Yeah.
first set. And so, in the case where lives previously were part of the community now are no longer here, how do you stretch the metaphor?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. Yeah, the question is, how do you apply the lesson of kintsugi to a shattering that involves genuine loss, which of course I was doing too in Jewish history, right? Because having another Jewish wedding doesn't bring back, doesn't bring back the home that was destroyed or countless homes that was destroyed. So it's a wonderful question. And I can only answer, I think, that I was speaking about it from a Jewish perspective. And to think Jewishly is to think covenantally. And covenantally means that you are bound to others in profound ways, not just in the here and now, but across generations, as Moses says. Lo itchem levadechem anochi koreit et habrit hazot ki asher yeshno po v'asher eineno po imanu hayom. Not with you alone do I make this covenant, but with those that are here and with those that are not here. To think covenantally is to bind yourself to people that are no longer here, and to think collectively. Not collectively in a way in which all individual identity is effaced, but it is still to think collectively. And so reconstruction is not just about you personally reconstructing yourself after experiencing a tragedy. It's reconstructing yourself as a community, bound in memory to those that are not there. For Judaism, memory both creates presence without denying the loss and the tragedy that has occurred. And all that is part of the scar, but also the scar made golden is memory. Memory is both. In American history, right, this is what Lincoln called the mystic chords of memory at the end of his first inaugural. He was trying to summon America to that, to stop the Civil War. That didn't work. But the mystic chords of memory is what it means to think covenantally. But of course, memory only works if you summon yourself to that responsibility to remember those that have come before. Otherwise, memory can be lost. So, covenant relies on memory to bind us all together. But, as Lincoln also said, it is for us, the living, that have to remember. Mm-hmm. Lincoln said that about those that died at Gettysburg. It is for us, the living, to ensure that those that die do not die in vain. And what that means is that if there were others that were sacrificed so that you are here to reforging after the shattering, for Lincoln the shattering was the Civil War, memory is what obligates all of us. This is, I think, a very Jewish concept. Very Jewish concept. And it lies at the heart of community, and especially covenantal community. It's the best I can answer your really very good question. Yeah.
Dr. Magnum.
Yeah.
I was just going to go on that one thing.
Yeah.
It's the communal versus the individual.
Yeah.
You're talking about the resilience of the community. It's so unfair to the individual, and trying to reconcile.
It's very difficult, but covenant at its best, in Rabbi Sachs's felicitous phrase, embodies what he calls integration without assimilation, in which you're all part of something larger, but your contribution to it is unique. That's what living covenantally means. In some larger sense, we are asked to bear in memory those that have come before. And that's an essential part of our community as well.
We have about 10 minutes, and I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the last question. Growing up in the Jewish ecosystem of the 1990s, there certainly was very little conversation about resilience. There was lots of conversation about tikkun olam, about repairing the world, and about a certain type of, the words that I was exposed to growing up, social action. Yeah. Okay, I worked for many years at Penn. I blessedly found my way to Brown. I was always struck that the scholar Adam Grant, whose work is so around resilience, taught through at Wharton, and I was always struck by the same institution that is creating some of the economic realities that make life so difficult today also produces a philosopher to help you deal with it. And I've wonder as we talk about resilience, are we are we dealing with the symptom? Are we talking about, are we helping people deal with the symptom but not addressing the illness? And what role do religious leaders like yourself have in not only giving our community the framework to get by better in this environment, but what responsibility do we have to, in fact, transform some of the illnesses that are making it so difficult to get by in this world?
So we certainly have a responsibility to address that. I think the question is, I'm actually interested in your thought, what are the illnesses? In other words, there are different diagnoses. Some would argue that resilience was less emphasized because self-esteem without resilience became the emphasis of much of our focus. So that preserving people from mistakes, disappointments, became the watchword. Whereas that's as regret, no regrets is no way to live. That's one possibility. You mentioned Penn. Of course, Penn has also Martin Seligman, right? So if you read as the father of positive psychology, but rightly understood, his studies are not about just, they're not at all just about being positive. It's about studying human resiliency. And it's about providing an explanatory style for life in which you don't deny when something bad has happened, but you also don't respond to it by saying, "This, and it was all my fault, and we'll never come back from it." And Martin Seligman, by the way, interestingly, in his book Learned Optimism, talks about Jewish history. But when he did his studies, he wanted to see how certain people were more resilient, so he was trying to think of what profession could he study where they achieved the most setbacks. So he decided to study insurance salesmen because they experience rejection constantly. And they would administer some sort of IQ test to pick the company, the main company. And he instead did a separate group of people who were not chosen based on IQ tests, but based on their explanatory style for how they approach setbacks. And they far succeeded it. And so what he was saying is that, and again, this is not my field, and there may be psychology students or teachers right here that will say to me, this is totally wrong, and if that's the case, I apologize. So, but his point was that much of psychology in the past had focused on human foibles and flaws and how to fix them. But we also have to understand the human capacity to address difficulties that are positive aspects. That's not the same thing as safeguarding people from mistakes. So I think that is our ultimate question, especially in the future of education. How do we both allow students to have some experiences that will be hard to take? Hearing a view that you totally disagree with. Losing an argument. Getting a bad grade. But also how they can be shown the way of making manifest their ability to overcome that. I don't have all the answers for that. But we are, if there is an illness in society, my own view is that it doesn't lie in something specifically economic, but it's linked to a lot of factors that people have been talking about. Social media, the emphasis only on self-esteem, not that self-esteem is unimportant, and a variety of other factors. How do we find that doesn't mean we're never going to go back to the world I grew up in the 1980s. I mean, that was the height of Western civilization, especially in culture, movies, and music. I mean, that goes without saying. But, where I would just come home in Chicago and get on my bike without a cell phone and just go who knows where and come home several hours later. It sounds crazy even to speak about it. It wasn't that long ago. I remember it. I don't know that we're going back to that. And if my child went out on his bike without a cell phone, I'd be super angry. But nor is my child allowed a smartphone, by the way. When I got a smartphone, I went to, I'm in the middle of this now because one of my kids lost their phone, and very hard to find a flip phone. And so I went into AT&T store, and I said, I need flip phone. And he said, well, it's cheaper to buy an iPhone. So I said, I know, but it's for my child. They only can have flip phones. And he looks at me and he says, man, your kids are going to hate you. But they don't hate me. So far, so good. So far, so good. And so I don't have all the answers. But I think that the woes are more social, I sense, than economic. What the solution to it is, I'm not sure. But one thing is certain. The potential to make manifest the resilient aspect of human nature is there. It may be latent within some of us, but it is there. Human nature has not changed in the turbulent years from 1980 to 2026. We're still the same people, just as we were the same people in the age of Socrates and the Talmud. We're the same. The question is how to find the best within us and to make that manifest.
Thank you, Rabbi Soloveichik.
Thank you so much.
Thank
for
you,
having me.
everyone.
Thank you.
And just as a note, if anyone wants to continue this conversation with Rabbi Soloveichik back at Brown RISD Hillel, there will be some snacks and
What
food.
kind of snacks are we talking about?
I'm thinking it's not sushi.
Not
okay?
sushi, I was
Okay,
gonna
it's
say.
not sushi,
There
but I
isn't-
don't know.
I don't think there's a kosher sushi place in Providence. That's
No,
just
there
my
isn't.
guess.
No, there isn't. Yeah.
Maybe someone should bring one.
Thank you all.
Maybe to Newport. I'll look into that.